Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Waking Up Spiritually podcast. It's so wonderful to have you here with us. I'm Wendy Rose Williams, and I am a past life energy healer, and I help people release pain, anxiety, depression, stuck energy, whatever is stopping you from being able to lead that happy, healthy life and feel that you can enjoy your purpose, understand and embrace your purpose. And my website is my full name, wendyrosewilliams.com. And I'd like to introduce you to my wonderful co-host, Gregg Kirk, who will tell you more about himself. And then we've got a real treat for you today with an incredible guest. And Gregg will walk you through that introduction too.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gregg Kirk. I am an energy healer as well, also a Lyme disease advocate and a certified health coach, health and wellness coach, helping a lot of Lyme patients, patients with chronic illness through herbal treatments, as well as patients of all kinds with energy healing, both remotely and in person. I also run weekly online group healing circles via Zoom. I do in-person fire circles and salt cave circles in the area where I live in Fairfield County, Connecticut. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, go to my website, like Wendy, it's my name, and it's spelled GreggKirk.com. And then click on the events link or the book an appointment request, and I would love to talk to you. So, Wendy, I'm going to go ahead and share the
Perfect. So Gregg's going to bring up our PowerPoint for today. And for those of you who are listening, you're able to find the broadcast. We have them saved on our website, which is wakingupspiritually.com, as well as, of course, on the podcast apps and on our YouTube channel. So Gregg, walk us through, introduce us to today's guest, who has been a colleague and a friend of mine since back in 2018 or earlier.
Yes, Simon Bown, our author and clinical hypnotherapist, specializing in past life regression. And he's a host of two popular podcasts, our Paranormal, Afterlife, and Alien UFO podcast. And he's released an extraordinary new book, delves into the mysteries of verified near-death experiences, also known as NDEs. His compelling book combines firsthand accounts and profound insights into what happens when we cross the threshold of life and death with verified NDEs. Those experiences corroborated by external evidence. At its core, the book offers a unique exploration into the survival of consciousness beyond physical death. Simon also holds a diploma in clinical hypnotherapy, and he's a certified past life regression therapist. He's conducted hundreds of past life regression sessions, specializing in guiding individuals through therapeutic processes. His research is informed by personal experiences with paranormal phenomena, including psychic flashes, UFO sightings, and other unexplained occurrences. And these experiences have contributed to his academic interest in the nature of consciousness and its potential existence beyond the physical body. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to do this. I want to do this at the right time here. Okay, come on.
Do you want to just minimize the?
No, yeah, no, please welcome Simon Bown. There he is, Simon.
Well, hello, Simon. And you just need to
There he
unmute.
did. He did it. Hi,
Hi,
Simon.
Simon.
Welcome
It's
to the.
Hi.
it's wonderful to have you here with us. You have written really such a special book because there's a lot of information available regarding near-death experiences, but to particularly get in that specific lane of verified past lives, verified near-death experiences where there's just that information that the person had no other way of knowing. It's just fascinating. So what gave you the idea for that? What was the inspiration for the book?
Well, with my podcast, our Paranormal Afterlife, the whole thing about the podcast is looking for evidence of an afterlife. So whether it is near-death experiences or children's past life memories and mediumship and things. So that's kind of my basic viewpoint of this. This is what I'm trying to find out. And I've read so many books about near-death experiences in preparation for doing interviews with people. And I think there's 350 interviews on my podcast. And then there's loads of other sort of podcast things I've done. And there's only one book I've found in all that time that is focused on the verified near-death experiences. They call them the veridical ones. And that was published, I think, in 2007. And for me, that's the center of what I'm looking for when I talk to a near-death experiencer. And I've interviewed some, and it's been a question towards the end, did you see anything that was later verified? And it's like it's the last thing they think about telling people, some of the near-death experiences. But that's the thing I'm most interested in.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah, so with the book, that's that kind of verification where when somebody's dead, they see something happen, and then later it's verified, and the people say, "But you were dead when that happened. There's no way you could have seen that." That's basically what the book's about.
Mhm.
Yes, that's fantastic. And one of the cases that you referred to, the case of the red shoe, that Kimberly Clark Sharp, who was a social worker at Harborview in Seattle, and who I know personally, she's been one of our guests, and she had talked about that amazing experience of how that patient had a cardiac arrest, and while she was coding left her body. And Kim was actually there and she responded to the code because she knew the patient. And Kim was the one who actually found this shoe in this crazy location on a ledge outside of the hospital where there was no way that the patient could have seen it and it couldn't be seen from the ground, etc. And Kim managed to find it and track it down. So I always thought that was an amazing, really, really interesting case because it was just it made so much sense to me that it was seen by that woman's soul, by her higher self when she was out of her body during the code. So, that type of verification is really interesting. So, Gregg, you and I can link that with the recording from today. We can link that interview and conversation with Kim also, because people might want more detail on that one.
Yeah. So, what are some of the ways that people verify, Simon?
Well, there's that thing of when people have the near-death experience, first of all, they tend to have that out-of-body experience where they're very close to their body. So it might be in the operating theatre and they see something and the doctors will be doing the resuscitation. And so they'll know that person's heart has stopped and their brain has flatlined, but that's all in that one location where the body is. And there's some skeptics who say, well, maybe they had some type of consciousness and that's how come they knew what was happening there. But then further verification comes with people that, in my book, several cases where they see something that's in another room in the hospital, or they see something that's, in one case, 7 kilometers from the hospital. So there's no way they could have seen that. That wasn't local. They couldn't have had some kind of consciousness. Then
Right.
another one of the verifications is one of the guys saw somebody during his near-death experience. He didn't know who it was.
Hmm.
And the guy said to them, tell Kim, I was going to say Kimberly then, tell Madison at the salon that I'm okay. And eventually he stumbled over this business card, which led him to a salon where Madison was working. And he talked to her about it and she confirmed everything he said. Yeah, that was my grandfather. So that's another type of verification.
Bringing
But
in a message from the other side, that was pretty unique. It was just so specific to get to that hairdresser.
yeah, yeah. And what else is there? There's another type of verification. Oh boy, I've got so much in my
There
book.
were a lot of them, Simon, where people, when they were in the hospital and that near-death experience was going on, where they had family and friends in the waiting room, and where they were able to describe those specific conversations that people had. Or there was one woman who described seeing, there was a doctor that was called in and was like rushing in to get into the OR to help her. And she saw him arriving and specifically was able to describe. So there were lots of, verification from other people of things that that person had no way of knowing at all, let alone while being clinically dead. So
Yeah.
It just is pretty amazing information that was shared.
Yeah, it's like the Hungarian guy, Tibor Putnoki, was when he was out of his body, he went into this room next to the ward, and it was where the nurses prepare things, and it had a two-way mirror, so they could see in the ward, but the people in the ward couldn't see in the room. But his spirit went in there, and there was a nurse on the phone with her husband, and they were arguing about trying to find the pediatrician's number because their children were ill. And he suddenly zapped across time and space, and he was in that apartment, and he saw everything there and saw the socks the guy was wearing and thought to himself, what kind of a man wears socks like this? They had all these little animal pictures on them. And
Yeah, they were very, he was describing those very unique socks.
yeah, and after he was resuscitated, the doctor said to him, you were dead for 9 minutes. What happened? And he told the doctor everything that had happened, and the doctor went off and confirmed it all and eventually visited that apartment. And when he returned to the hospital, he had those socks in his hand. And so that there was other types of confirmation there. He saw a package underneath a cabinet in the nurse's room that he couldn't possibly know was there.
One of the
And
nurses had dropped something when you said like
yeah,
she was, it sounded like she was preparing like trays that you put in the rooms or in the ORs, and you have the different sealed instruments, and she had dropped one and it had gone underneath, and he described very specifically like what gauge of needle it was and what it said on the package, and they were able to physically retrieve it and said, oh my gosh, and no one could see it, because it had gone way underneath this
yeah,
table or bookcase or whatever piece of furniture it was.
So how did you
yeah,
get
just find
started
it.
compiling these stories, Simon?
Um, it's a thing of doing so many interviews over so much time and reading so many books, and my fascination with this kind of verification thing. And I knew in my mind, I remembered, oh, that person had that thing, and that person had that thing, and something else. And then I started looking other places when I was doing my research for the book. I found an old book that was published in 1951 that was called something like The Phenomenon of Astral Travel. And of course, back then they didn't have the phrase near death experience. And if they heard about an out of body, they called it astral travel.
Oh,
And so I found some short cases in there. There's one from 1911, and there's one from a guy who was a British officer in the army in the Victorian period.
oh.
And he had this verification event, just like the one in 1911. And the description they give of the near death experience is just like what people describe today, exactly the same kind of thing. And there's great verification with those two cases. And, it's like talking to Ingrid Ankala. She's such a great person to talk to. And her near death experience was amazing, and all the verifications that came
Child,
through from it.
because she was the drowning.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
tell us about that?
Well, she was, I think, 3 years old, nearly 3 years old, and she'd been quite a sickly child. And her mum and dad had gone to work. They lived in Colombia, and there was a maid in the house that was supposed to be their carer and look after them. But she was awful. She didn't bother. And Ingrid and her sister were playing catch across a water tank, and the ball landed in the water, and Ingrid leant forward to pick up the ball and fell in the water,
Hmm.
and she drowned. And but she says when she was in the water, she started seeing these amazing lights there, and I think it was flowers as well. And then she saw a body floating there, which she didn't quite recognize. And the next thing she knew, she was hovering above the maid, and the maid was just lying in bed listening to a soap opera on the radio. And she said to herself, oh, this is really cool. Look at this. I can see Maria. And then she thought about her mum. And then again, in an instant, she was hovering over her mum, who was walking to the bus stop. But when she arrived there, her mum stopped and suddenly turned around, started running back to the house. She had this sudden intuition that something was wrong with one of her children. And it's interesting that occurred just when her spirit arrived in that. And so her mum rushed back and was able to pull her out of the water tank, and she was resuscitated. And so Ingrid talked to her mum about this later and described everything she saw that her mum did. And her mum was like, how could you know that? you were drowned in the water tank when I was going to the bus stop and running back. And then Ingrid did more research and checked what was that soap opera on that day when she drowned, and she was managed to look it up and find exactly that episode, and remembered that is what she heard on the radio when Maria was lying in the bed. And she's had contact with spirit guides, beings of light, since then. And she asked them, why did I go to Maria's place first? Why didn't I not go straight to my mum? And they said this was to show you about love. When you went to Maria, there was no love, so there was no connection. She had no awareness that you were in trouble. But you went to your mum, and there was this unconditional love. And there was that connection which she instantly knew that there was a problem. And so the spirit beings told her that's why you were shown those two things, to show you about the connection of love.
Trust.
What an amazing lesson. That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I've heard that story before on some documentary. So I don't know if it's in I don't know where. It possibly in the Life After Death series, but
she shared it via International Association of Near-Death Studies and
right,
on
right.
various podcasts.
It's in some at least one documentary, but yeah, no, that's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So which case or two stands out to you, Simon? That
Well, I do like that one with Tybor when he was in the hospital and sort of those things.
yeah.
There's Deborah King, who started off as a nurse. Before she was going to medical college, she was in an accident in a car, and they were sitting at a red light, and it turned green, and they're just moving forward, and a drunk in a truck slammed into them, and she was thrown into the back seat, and she had this short amount of time where she was floating above the car, looking down at her dad getting out and trying to talk to her. And so she became a nurse. And then there was this time when she was in the hospital and this patient had a heart attack and they resuscitated him. And it was 2 days later she came back to the hospital and he said, "It was you. You were the one." And she had been one of the team that resuscitated him. And they'd been working on him for a while and just wasn't working. And the doctor had said, "Let's call time of death. We're not going to get him back." And Deborah said she had this really strong intuition they should keep trying. And she said to the doctor, "Let's just go one more round." And he said, "Okay." And that brought him back. And so he was definitely dead when that happened. But he said, "You're the one." You said to the doctor, "Let's go one more round."
And he
So,
Wow.
described details of it too. He described how exhausted she looked and that she had very long hair that like fell across her face as she was like, leaning over as part of that team. Just that the detail. I mean, you can't make those things up. It's like, anybody can be like, "Oh, okay, I think there was a pair of socks on the floor at this, nurse's home." But it was like, okay, they were socks and they were very unusual and they had little animal characters on them. And I couldn't believe a man would be wearing them. There's just the specificity of it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
Simon,
But
go ahead.
I was just going to finish with the thing with Deborah King is she then went on to have a near-death experience with verification events. But during the near-death experience, that patient from before that she had saved in the hospital came to her and she was said to him like, "What are you doing here?" And he was like, "Well, where else would I be?" So I really like that she had a little near-death experience. Then this guy in her hospital did it, and she became a doctor, and she had her own near-death experience. This whole chain of events that came together.
It
Wow.
just felt like that perhaps there was some, just amazing pre-life planning to all that, connecting the dots. And I wrote down a quote from what she had mentioned because I loved where she said once she had her actual own near-death experience that it was difficult to grasp because she was having a life review that perpetrators are not judged, that there was a purpose for everything and ultimately beneficial for all. And I thought, wow, talk about someone figuring out the meaning of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just really, really, really was profound. And it seemed like so many of the people, Simon, I don't know if you picked up on this theme, that you wrote a sentence and really called out. So many of the NDEers often felt a sense of profound peace and love. And when they came back to their life, chose to come back, that there just was a greater purpose as well as compassion for humanity and the human condition, and a decreased fear of death. And I
Yeah.
that was just really a great summary of so many of the different cases. Were there other particular themes that really, really stood out for you?
Yeah, it was the life review that came up a lot,
Mhm.
and it's one of the things about the book, but for the listeners, each chapter is a different person having their near-death experience, and I describe the whole near-death experience, not just the verification stuff. And so we see these people having these life reviews where they not only experience their own life from their point of view, but they experience all these things that happen from the other person's point of view. So if they were mean to someone, they feel how bad they made somebody feel. And they get such a strong feeling, I suppose, of empathy from this. But they also get to see how these people feel really nice if he did something nice for them. And I think going through a life review can be so impactful if you really feel all those emotions. And they say it's not just the person that you might have been mean to, it's then a ripple effect, and how if they felt bad, they were mean to somebody else, and how it all went out, and you would feel all that. So I could see that they get, the life review is seen in different ways. There's somebody who was kind of standing in a bubble and it was all around them, and then somebody saw it on the TV screen, and then somebody said it was like on a table and it came up as a hologram. And there was somebody else said there was this big box they were looking into, and that idea that they experience all this, it seems like in just 1 second, an entire life, and all this other things. But you can see how that would be such an impact that when you come back from your near-death experience, that really would change you. And you do get more compassionate and much more empathy. And, there's some statistic that 70% of near-death experiences get divorced afterwards because it changes the people so much.
All right.
I
Yeah.
fall in that category. Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, and there was there was a movie quite a few years ago, 20, 25 years ago, called Defending Your Life. Did either of you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Albert Brooks, and it's
Albert
done as
Brooks. Yeah.
a comedy, but I think it's really well done. And just, they have these scenes of where they're being shown, what they had done in their lifetime, and some of it's humorous, but some of it's just, really, really touching. But
It's a lot more
defending your life.
drawn out, like a courtroom litigation versus
Right,
the one
right.
thing.
And the people were kind of like lined up at one point, watching these different scenes, and then they're comparing notes afterwards, and they're like, "Well, I was this and I was that." And another guy was like, he's like, "I was dinner," because he ends up getting eaten.
And
So,
yeah, there's a film I really like called A Matter of Life and Death
I
with
haven't
David
seen that one.
Niven. I think it's from 1950s,
Oh,
and it's set in the war where he's an RAF pilot, and his
Mhm.
plane gets shot down, and he finds himself washing up on the beach.
yes.
And there's this American woman who's part of the US Army who's doing stuff in England, and they start to have an affair. Well, not an affair, they're both single,
Right.
but then it's all in black and white, and then suddenly it's in color. And there's this French guy who's dressed from the 17th century, and he's saying, "Well, I'm terribly sorry, but when you were shot down, you died. But I missed you, so now you've got to come with me up to heaven." And David Niven saying, "No, I don't want to come back up to heaven. I'm fallen in love with this woman." And so the whole film is set on this French guy trying to get him to come to heaven. But there's images in there that look like near-death experiences when the guy takes him to these spiritual spaces. And it's almost like I see something in that film and think, I've heard somebody in a near-death experience describe exactly that.
Hey,
Yeah.
What it comes to at the end of the film is a big courtroom where he has to, like you say, kind of defend his life and give his case for why he should stay alive. And there's these other guys saying, no, he's dead. He's got to come.
yes, and then there's a similar film, Heaven Can Wait.
Yeah.
with Warren Beatty. So same thing. And he
That's
was
based on a
not going to
film.
leave,
It might
which
be
is,
based on the David Niven film,
I
actually,
think
but
it very well, I
Ah,
very well could
actually,
be.
actually, it's not. There's another film that's got Claude Rains in it. So Claude Rains is the person's angel helper, I believe. I don't know. Well, whatever the case, I wanted to get to another point that the interesting thing that I've heard, and Simon, back me up, or or not, about it. It seems like when people have these life reviews, the things that people as a human would think, oh well, my guides are going to talk about my degrees and all the accolades I've gotten throughout my life and all these awards I've won, and we're going to see all that. But no, the things that they're looking at are literally like what you said. Whether you were the little incidences of where they were nice to somebody or not, were what were reviewed versus what we think are big deals and milestones in our lives. Is it what do you think about that?
yeah, that's right. One of the cases in the book is George Ritchie, and this was 1941 when he was training in the army before going to Europe as a medic, and he had terrible pneumonia and he died. And he was in this small room where the bunk bed was, and this incredible being of light appeared, which I think he thought it might have been Jesus. And he had the life review, and this being said to him something like, "What have you done with your life?" And he was 19 and he thought, "What have I done? What have I done?" Quickly, something impressive. And he said, "I was an Eagle Scout." And the question was asked again, "No, what have you done?" And he realized it was about that thing of being loving and being compassionate and being empathetic. And all these little things showed up in his life review that were just like you might think they're tiny little things that you just forget and were not important. But this being considered them to be very important because it was times when he was really kind.
Mhm.
So that does show up. And there's another one with Tybor Putnoki where he's asked three questions with something like, "Could you look your fellow human in the eye and consider yourself a good man?" And he had to answer no. And there were three questions like that. He had to answer no to each one of them.
Wow. What was the repercussions from that to him or to the guides when he said no? What happened?
Yeah, but that was during the during the life review. So he was
Right.
shown all these times where he was mean,
Right.
and he felt all that pain that he'd caused. So that's really changed him for when he came back.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Interesting.
And I think this may correlate with uh, one of the top questions I hear from clients that they want to explore during their energy healing and during their past life regression is, please, I want to learn more about my life purpose. And maybe that's what it truly comes down to is we're missing the point. It's not about the ego type of accomplishments of I was an Eagle Scout, I got my MBA, I was this sports star, I got this writing award. It's not these types of things. It's did you spend the extra hour helping someone when you were tired and didn't feel like you had time, but you did it anyway? And were you kind, were you patient, were you loving? And maybe that's really what our purpose is. And that's why we're
Yeah.
missing the mark because we've got this egoic take on it.
Yeah, there's also this thing of thinking, "Oh man, if I'm mean right now, I'm gonna have a bad life review. I've got to be nice." And that's what comes up in your head when you think you might be in a really bad mood and you're driving somewhere, somebody cuts you up or something.
Yeah.
My goodness. And there was another remarkable case. It was Vincent Tolman, and this gentleman had taken this supplement. He and a friend had been doing all this body work and training and extreme exercise, and they just wanted to be able to do more. So they purchased this supplement via the mail, I believe, that was from Thailand. But because they couldn't read the package and they did not understand that it was like 100 times more powerful, so he ends up being poisoned by it, both he and his friend. And they end up he's trying to drive and keeps falling asleep, and his friend keeps shoving him awake because they're trying to go get some food because they thought maybe it would help take this out of their system because
Yeah.
they had overdosed and had gotten poisoned by too much of this frankly probably quite unknown supplement. And so he ends up in the bathroom at the restaurant and no one knows he's there. And his friend was sitting at the booth. So when he collapses, they get 911 for him quickly, but they don't realize the other gentleman is locked in the bathroom alone for a long time period. So he actually wakes up in a body bag because he's been pronounced dead once they did find him and couldn't resuscitate him and took him in the ambulance. And Simon, wasn't it the case in that one where there were three medics and the two experienced older ones were riding in the front and the young one, I think it was like he was very new, a young medic, and he was riding in the back with the patient, a former patient in the body bag, and he decided to his intuition was there's something happening, there's something going on, and he started trying to resuscitate him again. Do I have my facts correct?
Yeah, because Vinny was sitting in the ambulance looking over his body in the body bag, and the young EMT was opposite him. But Vinny said he felt this powerful energy come from behind him and over his shoulder, and he went straight into the EMT, and he saw the EMT's heart glowing, and he heard this voice say, "This one's not dead." And the EMTs were looking round and then just sort of brushed it off, and then it happened again with even more power. And the EMT unzipped the body bag and started using defibrillator. And the guys in the front are shouting over their shoulder, "Stop it! This is illegal. You're not supposed to do this. We can't do this on dead bodies." But the second time he zapped him, that they got a heartbeat. And so I think he was in the bathroom for 45 minutes. And so he was dead for 45 minutes.
Wow.
And then when they picked him up, they didn't go back to the hospital with sirens on trying to get there. They just thought they had a dead body. There was no
Holding
rush.
dead body, right? Exactly. It you've taken me with that story, you've taken me back to biblical times. You've taken me back to Lazarus rising from the dead and Yeshua um, running for a long, long distance and many hours to get to his brother-in-law to see if he could help him. And I believe you've probably both heard of the concept of the silver cord of life. And if that is still intact, there's still a life force in the person, the soul and the life force is still there. And that's how you can literally have these incredible miracles of someone rising from what appears to be dead. You can be clinically dead for this time period and then this incredible rising from the dead. So it's been documented for over 2,000 years.
Mhm.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
that's spectacular. Well,
Yes.
so Simon, let's talk a little bit about the paranormal stuff, the UFO sightings and other things. What's your experience with that type of phenomenon and information?
Well, there's a few things. One of them, I was gigging with my band. I was playing bass in this band. It was a Sunday night in this town west of London, and it must have been 1 a.m. on the Monday morning after the gig. I'm driving along this motorway called the M40, which I knew really well, and this is an area where there's no street lights. And I was driving, and it was odd because there were no other cars about. And up in front of me on the left was a really bright light in a field. And I knew that was an empty field. There was no buildings there. And, we drive on the left. So I was on that side of the motorway. And when I got to that point, I thought it might be emergency gas repairs or electricity or something. But it was a UFO. And it was about 25 feet off the ground, maybe 200 feet from me. Didn't move an inch the whole time. It was as big as a big house, and it was shaped like a rugby ball, and one half of the bottom of it was covered in all these red pin spot lights that were really bright. This must have been about 1992, 93. And coming out of the other end of it was a really powerful spotlight pointed at the ground. And I dropped my speed to about 5 miles an hour, and I'm leaning forward on the steering wheel, looking up through the windscreen. So I got a good look at it. It's not like I just shot past. And you go through a kind of mental checklist. You think, well, it's not a helicopter, it's not an aircraft, and it's just sitting there. It was completely silent, didn't move. And it couldn't be a hot air balloon, but also who'd be out in a hot air balloon that looked like that at 1 o'clock on a Monday morning?
Right.
And so then I just increased my speed and went home and knew enough about UFOs to check the clock to make sure there's no missing time. So that was
Was
one of the
there?
things. No, there wasn't.
Good.
But I was taken through a past life regression with a woman that was trained by Dolores Cannon, and what we were doing was a past life regression. There was nothing to do with UFOs and aliens, and I saw this past life in 17th century Venice, and we went through the life, and we saw the end of the life, and I was looking down on the body in, spirit form, and she was saying, "Just drift away, just drift away. What? Tell me what you see next. What's the first thing that comes to you as you drift away?" And I went from 0 to 100 terrified. It was like instant. And my muscles were quivering. And she said afterwards she could see that in my arms and my legs. I was so scared. And I was lying on this table with these four grey aliens around me. And they had some kind of contraption. They were doing something to me. And I was naked on this table. And so I saw that happening. I was so scared. I didn't tell her. I didn't want to seem a bit of a weirdo or something. And we stopped just for a few minutes. And I told her, and she said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, I'll go back to it. So I did. I went back to that. And I saw myself standing up at the end of that kind of operating table bed thing with a grey either side of me. And then suddenly it was like they were giving me a vision of standing in this big open area. It was like a forest, but an area maybe the size of a football pitch, football field had been cleared, and it was all this chopped down trees and all these fresh stumps of trees. And there was a planet up in the sky that was really close to Earth, a lot closer than the moon, so close it would be impossible because gravitational fields and magnetic fields between the two planets would probably cause massive earthquakes and things. But there was a pathway coming from that planet to where I was standing, and I was amongst all these adults, and all these children dressed in white were coming down the pathway, and everybody looked so happy, and the adults were hugging the children. And then I got a sentence come into my head that said, "When the planets meet, the children will return," which, they're trying to give me some kind of message. And then I was back in that room with them, and they walked me to the wall, and the hole opened up in the wall. But it didn't lead to a corridor or another room. It led to some amazing energetic space that was all energy and light and multicolored. And the hole in the wall was kind of cookie cutter shape for me, that I fit perfectly into it. And I went through, and then I was suddenly shooting across this energy, and I could get the impression there were other humans there, and we're all heading the same direction. And then I got into this white room that was long and thin, kind of like a subway carriage or a tube train carriage. And there were all these white seats on the sides that kind of just came out of the wall, and clothes all over the floor. And there were two greys at the other end. And I just got this message that kind of said, "No one leaves till you put your clothes on." And I found my stuff, and I went to the end where the greys were, and there was just a hole in the floor. And I stepped forward and went down through the hole. And then the next thing, I'm in my flat at home in London. It's 2 a.m. I went to bed and went to sleep. And then next morning, forgot all about it, just went to work as usual. So that was just sprung up in hypnosis, and we weren't trying to find it.
Wow. A lot going on there.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think what comes up in hypnotherapy, as you know, both of you know, well, is just what needs to come up comes up, and it can be so surprising, but it's just our higher self, our guides, God, or whoever wants, that to come up for us, that's what comes up, and to be ready for it. Simon, did you have any sense, have you ever considered that that might have been uh, new Earth, meaning the planet we're on, but at the higher vibration? With that message of when the planets come together, or when the planets meet, the children will return. Did you have any sense of that, perhaps?
No, I didn't. No, what it reminded me of was the hybrid kind of thing that abductees talk about. Of Greys take
Yes.
them on board ships and show them
Right.
children and say,
Right.
this is your child, but it looks like a hybrid between an alien and a human.
Yeah.
That's what it made me think of. But also that whole thing that I remember during hypnosis, I'm still not sure that it was real, that it happened. I wondered if I've read so much on alien abduction that my subconscious could have just made it up.
Mhm.
But then I have talked to people on my UFO podcast who are experts in this stuff, and they're like, no, no, that happened.
Yeah. It's just so detailed.
Say,
Just,
trust what comes up for yourself.
just so I understand, do you think you were abducted in your past life? Is that because you were looking at your end of life experience in the 17th century, I believe you said, and then you felt the fear of the alien abduction? Do you think you had been abducted in that life, or somehow this was a current day thing coming through the
Yeah.
hypnosis?
Yeah, it was a current day, current life thing. Because
Okay.
the flat in London I went back to, I lived in all through the 90s for about 7 years.
So that's interesting. I've never heard of anybody having something like that come through past life regression. So that's kind of fascinating just in and of itself. Have you heard anyone else having something like that?
I have. There's just absolutely, and as you said, Simon, it's not that you go looking for a particular thing. It's not about what our ego is looking for, but we get, during those healing sessions, we get what we need, which may not match what we want. But I've learned to trust it, even if it's, doesn't, even if it seems far out and crazy, and we don't want to be judged for being weird. You just have to trust, because as Gregg said, it's so detailed. Plus, you've got that good logical mind, you've got the tech background, you've got the scientific mindset, and it's just a beautiful blend with allowing the intuition and the right brain, and the creativity to come through of whatever we need to see and experience. That's what comes up in the sessions.
Yeah, I think it's about being on a spiritual path and taking all these steps. And I wonder if I saw that UFO because they wanted me to see them. It's like
Exactly.
it's a kick up the pants in a way, like, come on, pay attention. And
Right.
then when I saw the abduction, that was another step on the path. But then when I've had other experiences, say with feathers or with psychic flashes and things, it sounds like I've had a lot of stuff and it happens all the time, but it's every 4 or 5 years something will happen and you move along a path. And I wonder if right from the beginning the plan was to get me into a position where I'd be spreading information as a podcaster and maybe writing books. And
Absolutely, because you're a teacher and an educator and a researcher with, what you're doing, and just communicating that so beautifully. So I just wanted to go back to one or two of the cases. Karen Thomas said something really beautiful, that you had written in the case study with her, and she talked about all the different prayers that were being said for her while she was going through her near-death experience. And she said that each prayer created a musical note, and that they all linked together to form a melody. And that was her sense of that. And I just thought that was just so beautifully put. Just that the energetic nature of prayer. And
yeah,
Judy Ryan, who was our most recent guest, for Gregg and I, on this podcast, she had talked about that also and said that there's been just a fair number of realizations and of studies of, you could just tell when it's someone has had a lot of prayer going on their behalf, because there's something different going on energetically. So I thought that
Yeah,
was
I
lovely.
think she said how she could see them in some way they were in light as well as in sound,
Right.
and that the top prayer, the last one that linked them to her, was her daughter's prayer,
Mhm.
and it seemed like that would be a really powerful one if it was her daughter.
Yes.
Exactly. Exactly. And then there was a case that you talked about, you shared of Crystal Faith, who was a 17-year-old teenager who had a very complicated pregnancy and delivery, and went through just a it was just a miracle that she made it through all of that and recovered from it. And she talked about the angels singing, and when she was having her experience, and she was on the other side, and it was the most beautiful music she'd ever heard. And she said she really couldn't put it into words. And I went through something like that. I literally fell to my knees when I heard this angelic choir. It was a good 10, 12 years ago. And I was very surprised. It was a weekend, and I just had an energy surge. And I literally stayed up all night writing, which I had never done before. And I got up and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so cramped. I'm so stiff from having, sat at the computer too long. And I got up to stretch and I turned around. I was like, oh my gosh, it's dawn. And there was just this beautiful sunrise, outside the window. And all of a sudden, I heard this angelic choir. And I literally just fell to my knees because it was like, it's like trying to take it all in. I was trying to ground myself. um, and it was a Beatles song, and it was Let It Be, and I just kept really hearing the sign about Mother Mary, come to me, and how amazing and cool that is, because over time I did become a channel for Mother Mary. So I thought, well, that was pretty literal. Mother Mary
Yeah,
come to me. But I just really related to what Crystal Faith had said in your case study, talking about what happened with her. She also talked about being in the most beautiful garden on the other side, and that she realized that whatever she thought and wondered about, it would then respond to, and she realized she was creating, and was a part of it, and was just making, a part of making this happen. And I thought that was so powerful, because we just can forget what powerful creators we are and co-creators that we are with the divine, and we can just be in this, oh, I can't ever make anything happen, and why doesn't this ever happen for me? We can get in this pity party, victimy place, because our ego can like set all these plans, and but I thought she just expressed that so beautifully. And I thought to be hearing that coming from a 17-year-old was pretty remarkable, what she brought back from those experiences. Was
yeah.
there anything else you really remember from that one about Crystal Faith with that awful pregnancy and delivery complication?
I remember that she'd been given an epidural and it needed time to work. And the surgeon came in and said, no, we've got to operate right now. We've got to do cesarean. And the anaesthetist said, but the epidural hasn't taken yet. And the doctor turned to her, she's 17 years old, and just said, do you want your baby alive or dead? That was seemed pretty mean to me, but then it got to the point.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yes, so she did end up having the cesarean, and really was able to feel way too much, which just the whole thing sounded horrific. But I just loved some of what, she described of the other side, and just how she put the pieces together, and being shown. I think she was also shown her three children that she would
Mm.
have in that lifetime if she chose to go back. And she was interacting with them a little bit. And she had assumed, because she could see, the tiny form, and it was like, I think she said it was like a cross between like baby and angelic and fairy. And she went to like reach for it and pick it up, and it told her off because it
Yeah,
was very complete spirit, and it said, "Hey, who do you think you are? You can't just grab me and pick me up. You don't have my permission." Because she went to pick it up like you would a baby. And she
yeah.
she got told, "Nope."
And then she was kind of thrown into a black void.
She went into the void from there. Yeah, she was
Yeah,
very uncomfortable with the void. Hmm.
I did ask her about that when she was on the podcast. I said, well, now that child was born, have you ever said to them, Oi, you threw me into a void?
How does she
But
get along with that child?
oh, just fine, I think, yeah. But it was funny. Well, I don't know, funny, but she was in the void and then she found herself kind of in a bed with this spiritual being at the end of the bed. And she was more or less told, "This is it. You're dead now. You can't return to your body." But she said, "No, I have to go back for my baby." And this spiritual being was said, "Sorry, it's not going to happen." And she demanded, and this spiritual being said, "Well, it's I can't make that decision. It's almost like it was saying it's above my pay grade."
My pay
I,
grade.
I,
Yep.
yeah, and so it was a thing where she noticed that she could have telepathic communication if they were looking straight in each other's eyes,
Yes. She
and
talked about just trying to get it to look, the being
yeah.
straight at her, and it didn't want to.
Yeah, and then the being looked up and I think she saw beams of light coming from the eyes and there was some sort of communication going on. And then it turned back to her and said, okay, yes, you can go back to your body.
Wow.
But it kind of reminds me about the miraculous healing that we see in some of these cases where the people say when they were coming out of the hospital or soon after the NDE, the doctors are confused because the recovery is so fast and the healing. And it seems, there's really something spiritual going on there because they say it's a miracle and they just can't explain it.
Right. I mean, case in point, the other case where you talked about the person had died 45 minutes before. I mean, if your brain doesn't receive oxygen with like, what is it, 4 minutes,
Mhm.
it's a lost cause. You can't
Mhm.
resuscitate or, a person will be brain dead. But
Mhm.
yet these kinds of things happen. So it's
That
incredible.
time's different on the other side, so there
Exactly.
must be,
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
really, really going on between worlds
Right.
in
So
those sorts of
we're at
cases.
the end of our hour, Simon. I just wanted to ask you one general question, or just to get your take on this, because um, so I'm just going to kind of spill it out. So you've been doing this for a while, and you've been hearing themes, the near-death experiences, even possibly some of the alien interactions as well. But it seems to me like all of these experiences, if you want to link them together through a common thread, it's kind of two things. One, that there's more to life than what we thought, you know, like in a spectacular and even shocking and amazing and beautiful ways. That's so we're that's why perhaps we're having these experiences. And then two, it's what we talked about earlier. We're here. Our purpose in life is that we can do whatever we want because we have free will. But if we want to have an enjoyable, beautiful life, it's about being kind and loving to in every interaction that we have in our lives. What do you think about that? Am I getting that right, or is there anything you would add or adjust to what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that's you're pretty much right. But there's also like a reincarnation point of view that you plan your life before you come here
Yeah,
and you're here to learn a lesson. And that might be an awful lesson.
yeah,
And it can be really hard to be loving and to be that compassionate when you're experiencing such bad things.
yeah.
And that may be part of the life plan that's your experience you're supposed to have.
Yes,
And so it gets more complicated, doesn't it?
it
Well,
does.
maybe
It
with
does. You're absolutely
karma
right.
and
Yeah,
then
you may choose a role where you don't have, or you lose your legs or something, or you may volunteer for a role as being somebody like Hitler, for instance. you know where you need, from what I understand and all the reading I've done and information I've gotten through channeling, is that we are here to live all spectrums of types of lives: good, bad, indifferent,
Yeah.
lazy, aggressive, all these things. And that, so we may have a life where, because when I had a past life thing done, one of my first ones was, the past life regressionist said, "Oh, I think you had a life where you were, practicing, dark magic." I'm like, I would never do that. Like, not an ounce of me in this lifetime feels that way. She said, "No, we all do. We all do stuff like that, and then we do other things because we have to, have the full
You have to get the
experience."
360.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So I agree with you about those details as well. It does get a lot more complicated than that, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I had a client, a hypnosis client, and we got to the point where we were entering the past life, and they just wanted to see what comes up. It wasn't for a therapy or something. And I said, okay, so what do you see? What's around you? And they said, I'm watching the naked women and children go into the gas chamber. And I said, can you look down and see what you're wearing? And she said, I'm a man and I'm dressed in a German uniform.
Mm.
And so then I just moved us away from that, straight away from that life. My clients come to me for exploration and just see you don't want to go into that kind of role and start examining that life.
Yeah, yeah, a little too much truth.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Simon, is there anything? Well, actually, is there anything you? How can people get in touch with you? What are How can they read your books? What do you recommend?
Yeah. So the book's on Amazon and it's on Kindle and paperback and audiobook. And people can also get it at places like Barnes and Noble and that kind of distribution. It's probably not on the shelf in Barnes and Noble. You'll have to ask them to order it for you or go on their website.
And is your
And
release date coming up? Is it March 24th, Simon?
yeah, yeah, March 24th. So I'm starting to get nervous. And
Oh, get excited. It's a wonderful book. There's just such depth to it. And also, you can read it a chapter at a time. You can read it a case study at a time. You don't have to go through, because I had to put it down because it was just like, oh, this just brings up so much for me. This just, for me, it was a lot of emotion and intensity in a good way to it. But then it's like, okay, I need to put that down. And then go back to it. And I did end up reading it fully twice. So it
uh,
really is, it's wonderful. Highly recommend it. And
yeah,
Simon's a wonderful hypnotherapist. My sessions with him, because we've traded sessions with each other, and the sessions I did with him are actually the last few chapters in my most recent book. So you can read them there and just kind of get an idea of his wonderful facilitation as the therapist.
well, that's great. Yeah. And so I've got my website, which is pastliveshypnosis.co.uk. And on there, there's a link to a booking page, and you can book a free consultation, and we can talk for 20 minutes about if you'd like to do a past life regression and what you'd want to achieve from it. And there's hang on, if I point, yeah, I'm pointing the right side. That's my podcast, Our Paranormal Afterlife. And the other one's called Alien UFO Podcast.
We'll share your links in the descriptions that we put for this broadcast. So thank you for that.
Great.
Fantastic. Well, it was so wonderful to get to have this conversation with both of you. And thank you for being here, Simon, and thank you for who you're being in the world, and just wish you all the best with the book.
Thanks a lot. I've really enjoyed it. It seems like, only 10 or 15 minutes has passed. It's such an enjoyable conversation.
Yeah.
Yes,
Great.
likewise. Okay, well, let me just walk everyone through a couple upcoming events. So you can find the events on my website, which is wendyrosewilliams.com. And I'm offering a group past life exploration on March 15th. So that's this coming Saturday from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Pacific time. And I will schedule a date for a new live channeling of the Ascended Masters and Angels. And Regression Healing 2, Joe and Marilyn, it's now available in audiobook format, thanks to Gregg sound engineering that for me. This is fun to be here with two musicians also, as well as in paperback and on Kindle. And there's a special promotion next Monday, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, and it'll be just $2.99 on Kindle. And as I mentioned, the last couple of chapters of the book, what wrapped it all up was those wonderful sessions that I had with Simon. And you can also hear some of the backstory to my Joe and Marilyn experience on the Ask Julie Ryan podcast, because I was her guest, and she's a wonderful friend that we have in common. Simon, you had a wonderful couple of times, I think, that you were on her
Yeah.
podcast, and one of them you regressed Julie during the podcast to just a really powerful past life that explains so much about the amazing force of nature and enigma that Julie Ryan is. And Gregg, you said to her, "Do you ever sleep?"
Right. Yeah.
So just love Julie Ryan. Join us, please, 2 weeks from today on March 24th on Simon's book launch day for the next Waking Up Spiritually podcast. And we're going to have my friend Shannon Torrance is a marvelous psychic medium, and she's also a voice actor, and she will take us through that journey of how do you go from being an actor in LA to become a psychic medium. And she will be walking us through some of the amazing experiences that she's had waking up spiritually. Please visit our website, which is wakingupspiritually.com. You'll find a broadcast tab on there, and you'll be able to get to all the various episodes that we do. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. We so appreciate you rating and reviewing us on Apple iTunes or whatever your favorite podcast app is, and it helps other people, like-minded people, find this content. Visit Gregg at his website and join him for one of his wonderful events or healing sessions. And it's Gregg, GreggKirk.com, or visit me, WendyRoseWilliams.com, regarding doing a private session together, energy healing, a past life regression, channeling for you, getting you connected with your guide. And in addition to the private sessions, also the group events. So thank you for being here. We so appreciate you. And thank you for joining us.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Simon.
Bye. It's been great. Thanks.